The paradox of being a good person, Orwell's warning, hidden risk of goodness. In an era where truth grows fragile and noise clouds every thought, George Orwell's voice remains a call to awaken the silent strength within. Orwell didn't just write books. He lit a torch against the slow erosion of truth, dignity, and freedom through his battles with injustice, his compassion for the overlooked, and his unflinching defense of inner freedom. Orwell reminds us that real healing doesn't come from escaping reality. It comes from confronting it. His life was a journey not toward comfort, but toward authentic courage, daring to love, to hope, and to live honestly in a world increasingly detached from meaning. In this video, we dive into Orwell's timeless lessons, exploring how his silent rebellion against manipulation, indifference, and surrender still echoes today. If you've ever felt disillusioned by the world around you, stay with us and rediscover why even in the darkest times, one honest soul can still keep hope alive. George Orwell, the man who painted a wake-up call for humanity. Some voices echo beyond their own time, and George Orwell is one of them, born in the early years of the 20th century. Orwell was not merely a writer, he was a keen observer of the subtle movements of power, corruption, and the gradual erosion of humanity from the depths of his heart. He understood that the greatest threat to humankind does not always come from guns or war, but from the silent distortions of truth and consciousness. Orwell's warnings about the manipulation of language, technology, and media were not only relevant to his own era, they became a mirror reflecting humanity's perpetual dangers. He did not fight with weapons, but with words, with stories both piercingly cold and deeply human, awakening those courageous enough to face the truth. In a world where trust is increasingly eroded, the presence of people like Orwell reminds us that healing does not mean fleeing from reality, but mustering the courage to confront it. Finding the meaning of life is not about seeking artificial comfort, but about having the bravery to defend what is right, even if only within the fragile heart of a single human being. From the poor upper middle class to a heart compassionate for the common people, George Orwell, born Eric Arthur Blair, came from a peculiar family background. Aristocratic roots, coupled with declining finances. His mother carried the habits and expectations of the upper class, while his father struggled with a modest administrative job. Orwell described his class status as lower upper middle class, a strange mix of pride and deprivation. This childhood experience left a deep imprint on him. It carved a profound sense of contradiction, close enough to the working class to understand their struggles, yet haunted by the shame of a lost status. This nurtured in Orwell a rare sensitivity to social injustice and a deep compassion for the forgotten people. Had he not silently tasted adversity, perhaps Orwell would never have seen the true faces behind society's glitter. Likewise, it is through the cracks in every soul that the light of human kindness finds its way through. Understanding the precariousness of his origins, Orwell neither denied them nor drifted along with false standards. He chose to stand with simplicity with those who lacked the power to change their fate, yet preserved a silent dignity. Within each of us, there are unresolved contradictions and dark corners, but when we dare to face them, compassion is born. Orwell's life story reminds us that the path of healing does not begin by denying our origins, but by accepting them as essential parts of our journey toward growth and love for the world. When schools and empires could not break a free spirit from a young age, Orwell revealed a spirit not easily subdued. After his family returned to England, he attended prestigious schools, thanks to the support of certain relatives. Although academically successful, he quickly grew disgusted with the educational environment, a system designed more to produce obedient citizens than thoughtful souls. Orwell spent his youth in silent repulsion, learning the unspoken rules that govern society while quietly resisting them in his heart. Instead of following the expected path to university, he veered off course and joined the colonial police force in Burma, however. His years of service only deepened his inner conflict amid carrying out his duties. He witnessed firsthand the injustices inflicted by the empire on ordinary people who had no say in their fate. Orwell did not only see an external apparatus of oppression, he saw how the system sought to colonize the mind, turning people into those accustomed to giving orders, obeying them, or remaining silent. The most frightening thing, he realized, was not the orders themselves, but the voluntary surrender of free thought. This realization became a pivotal moment in his inner life. It taught him that true freedom is not merely the absence of external chains, but the strength to keep one's mind unconquered. From this point on, Orwell's life would no longer be a mere drift along preordained paths. It became a ceaseless journey to protect the core of human freedom. And we, too, repeat this journey in our everyday choices, either letting ourselves be carried along by the system or preserving the right to think, to feel, and to live as truly free human beings. The Wandering Years, a journey in search of life's meaning. After leaving the colonial police force, Orwell did not seek status, nor did he pursue material security. He wandered through the grimy streets of Paris and London, living among the working poor, the nameless people of society there. Where there seemed to be nothing left to lose, he found another kind of truth, raw, yet pure. Orwell worked a variety of menial jobs, washing dishes, selling second-hand books, occupation society, viewed with pity or disdain, yet instead of feeling ashamed, he perceived a silent dignity radiating from those who lived without fanfare in these places. There were no societal masks, only humans facing life with patience and a quiet dignity unnoticed by applause. These years did not turn Orwell bitter. On the contrary, they made him gentler toward humanity. Failure, poverty, and loss, he realized, were not enemies of dignity, but often the gateways to deeper compassion. Some journeys seem like aimless wandering, but are, in fact, the shortest path back to one's true heart. Orwell no longer sought life's meaning in grand banners or lofty promises. He found it in the eyes of workers, in the small smiles amid scarcity, and from there, he understood, sometimes, the simplest things are the most eternal. The road to healing is not always straight sometimes. It is a path of wandering through loss and disillusionment to finally realize that the most precious thing to safeguard is the small kindness no circumstance can ever take from us. When ideals must be paid for in blood, a turning point in the Spanish Civil War. In 1936, George Orwell reached a major turning point when he decided to travel to Spain, initially as a journalist reporting on the Civil War. But amidst the fiery atmosphere of ideals and beliefs, he could not merely stand aside. Orwell joined the militia, fighting directly against fascism, believing it was the most practical way to defend human dignity and freedom. However, the reality of the battlefield struck him like a bucket of cold water. What he witnessed was not just gunfire and bodily wounds, but the shameless distortion of truth. He saw battles that never occurred being glorified in the press, brave people being labeled as traitors, victories existing only on paper for the first time. Orwell felt deeply that not only could bullets kill dignity, but so could the manipulation of truth. Orwell was gravely wounded, shot through the throat, nearly losing his life. Yet the deeper wound was in his heart, the heartbreak of betrayed ideals and the pain of seeing faith twisted into tools for dirty games of power. Nevertheless, Orwell did not give up. He refused to let wounds turn him bitter. Instead, he retained a profound lesson that to defend freedom, one must not only fight tyranny, but also fight to protect the truth. And that battle is often more silent, but no less grueling than any battlefield. In each person's healing journey, there are such moments of disillusionment. The important thing is not to avoid them, but to transform them into stepping stones for deeper growth, resilience, and compassion. Orwell did just that, leaving us a quiet yet powerful example: to stand tall even when our dreams are torn apart. The price of losing truth. The threat of totalitarianism. What Orwell witnessed in the Spanish Civil War was not merely isolated instances of deceit. He saw a dangerous trend quietly expanding: the replacement of objective truth with versions of truth molded to suit the needs of power. When truth is disregarded, all that remains are fragmented pieces of belief, easily bent to the will of whoever controls language. Orwell no longer saw lies as simply a moral failing of individuals. He recognized them as the foundation for a new kind of power, the power of those who no longer needed to prove right or wrong, but only needed to control how people thought and felt. And once people lost the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood, totalitarianism no longer needed to impose itself with violence. It could manipulate with words alone. Orwell's warning was not aimed at any particular political faction. He understood that totalitarianism could emerge from any side. As long as people lost faith in the existence of objective truth, when everything becomes merely a battle between competing truths crafted by different agendas, when individuals abandon their responsibility to seek truth for themselves, society becomes a vacant field where totalitarian regimes can take root. Yet, Orwell's lesson does not stop at warning. It opens another path, the path of returning to inner awareness in a world full of noise and manipulation. Maintaining the ability to think independently, to feel authentically, and to stay loyal to one's inner truth becomes both a profound act of healing and a silent but powerful act of resistance. We do not protect freedom merely by opposing oppressors. We protect freedom by refusing to let our minds become fertile ground for falsehood to flourish. The pen as a torch, turning literature into a weapon to defend freedom. After his bitter real-world experiences, Orwell realized that a sharp pen could sometimes be stronger than any weapon for him. Writing was not for embellishment or mere entertainment. Writing was a form of battle. Writing was a way to keep the flame of truth and freedom alive against the darkness of lies and oppression. Orwell openly admitted he never sat down to write simply to create a work of pure art. Every piece he wrote stemmed from a feeling of injustice, from a lie he could not remain silent about, from a truth that had been distorted and needed to be brought into the light. It was his anger at injustice, his pain at corruption, that fueled the powerful voice behind his words. Orwell understood that freedom is not something that naturally exists, and truth is not something that naturally maintains itself. It must be constantly spoken, constantly defended, constantly fought for with words, with thoughts, with uncompromising loyalty to truth. Literature, for Orwell, was not a refuge for dreamers, but the silent battlefield for souls that refuse to be subdued. In a world increasingly loud and easily swayed by hollow slogans, Orwell's lesson is more valuable than ever. Sometimes, a single honest story, an unmanipulated thought, is the bravest act. Healing society begins when each individual dares to remain internally honest, even if it means walking alone. Orwell chose that path, and that choice, though it cost him isolation and much pain, lit a torch for humanity, a torch that must never be allowed to die in the heart of every free soul. When revolution betrays itself, the prophecy of Animal Farm. In 1945, after years of grappling with reality and ideals, Orwell released Animal Farm, a simple story about farm animals. Yet within it lies a powerful and painful indictment of how revolutionary dreams can be betrayed by the very hands that once nurtured them. In Animal Farm, The animals rise up to claim freedom, dreaming of a fairer society, but soon, the new leaders who once shared their hardships re-establish an even more cunning and brutal form of oppression in the end. The animals look from pig to man and man to pig, and can no longer tell the difference. Orwell did not write Animal Farm merely to criticize one particular revolution. He exposed a sad law of history. When power is not restrained by inner awareness and compassion, it will corrupt any ideal, no matter how noble it was at the beginning. Yet Animal Farm does not merely spread despair by exposing the mechanism of corruption. Orwell gives us a chance to look inward. Each of us carries a bit of snowball idealism and a bit of Napoleon, the hidden thirst for power. Recognizing this duality is the start of a profound healing journey. Instead of clinging to illusions of absolute purity, we learn to humbly face the darkness within ourselves. The message of Animal Farm is not just a political warning, it is a reminder of personal responsibility within any system, that freedom is not a gift granted from above, but a choice that must be protected every day through the smallest actions. We do not only battle external tyrants, the quietest, yet most important battle always happens within our own hearts. 1984, a letter of despair sent to the future after Animal Farm. Orwell poured all his remaining strength into writing his final work, 1984, even as his health deteriorated from tuberculosis. He pressed on line after line, as if sending an urgent message to generations yet unborn. In 1984, truly is a cry from the depths of despair, a warning of what can happen when truth is crushed beneath the boot of power. 1984 paints a world where control has invaded every thought, every private moment. Winston Smith, the protagonist, struggles not just to survive, but to preserve truth within his own mind. Yet in this society where language is reduced, where history is rewritten daily, even thinking the wrong thoughts becomes a crime. Thought crime. The end of 1984 is not a triumph of freedom, but a silent defeat. Winston, at last, loves Big Brother. Yet this painful ending makes Orwell's message even stronger. If we do not guard the truth within ourselves, there will come a day when we no longer recognize what we have lost. Still, amid the gray gloom, 1984 offers a sliver of hope, awareness. When we know the danger exists, when we see clearly the mechanisms that erode freedom, we have a chance to resist, beginning within our own souls. No one can save us from mental imprisonment except ourselves. The deepest healing comes not from overthrowing rulers, but from refusing to let our minds become voluntary prisons. Through his anguished pages, Orwell reminds us, even in the darkest world, light begins from a very small place, a thought that refuses to bend. Orwellian, When a Warning Becomes a Weapon for Oppressors after 1984 was published. George Orwell's name became attached not only to his books, but also to a new term, Orwellian. Initially, the word was used to describe societies where truth is distorted, language manipulated, and individual freedom crushed under invisible mechanisms of power. Yet, ironically, over time, Orwellian itself was misused and abused. Many have weaponized it to serve the very political agendas Orwell once warned against. A word born to defend freedom has sometimes been used to obscure truth and mask new forms of oppression, even systems Orwell would have fiercely opposed have cited his name to legitimize their own aims. This reflects a sad truth. Even the sharpest tools, the clearest warnings, can be twisted when people lack inner awareness. This was Orwell's deepest fear, that manipulation would not only come from blatant acts, but from indifference, laziness of thought, from our readiness to accept labels without questioning their true nature. Yet on the other hand, It also highlights the importance of maintaining our own clear-sightedness. We cannot rely on slogans, symbols, or historical figures to think for us. Truth does not reside in catchphrases. It lives in each conscious action, each moment of questioning, each small effort not to give in to convenience. Orwell did not merely leave us with literature, he left us with a task to prevent ourselves from becoming unconscious tools of the very things we once hated. That, too, is the deepest healing journey, not only confronting external darkness, but facing the ambiguity, the vulnerability, and the risks of corruption within ourselves. Orwell, defender of democratic society, not an enemy of socialism. In the endless debates about Orwell, many have assigned to him positions he himself had criticized. Some have seen Orwell as a symbol of opposition to socialism, simply because of his fierce criticisms of totalitarian regimes that claim to represent that ideal. But the truth is far deeper and more nuanced. Orwell was not against socialism, on the contrary. He was a strong advocate for a democratic society, one where people could live freely, where resources were shared fairly without losing individual dignity. What he criticized was not the dream of social justice, but the corruption of that dream when it fell into the hands of those who merely thirsted for power. In every line he wrote, Orwell emphasized that power, if not restrained by awareness and compassion, would corrupt any system, whether capitalist, socialist, or otherwise. To him, the problem was not with slogans or flags, but with the forgetting of the human being, when awareness of individual dignity is sacrificed for any abstract goal. No matter how noble it appears, the result is inevitably oppression. Orwell reminds us that freedom and justice are not opposites. A truly just society must be one where individual freedom is respected, and a truly free society cannot exist if injustice and inequality are allowed to destroy the most vulnerable. His message transcends ordinary political disputes. It is an invitation toward profound healing, building a world where justice is not purchased at the cost of tyranny, where compassion is valued above hollow ambitions, a world where truth, kindness, and freedom are not distant ideals, but the foundation for every small action of daily life. When fragile truth must be shielded by compassion in his final years, Orwell no longer had the strength to travel far or raise his voice as he once did, but in every word he left behind, a quiet truth shines. That truth, freedom, and human dignity are inseparably linked to the deepest compassion. When truth is bent, when freedom is threatened, it is compassion, not blind rage, that can save them. Orwell understood very well the fragility of the values he fought for. Truth can be distorted simply by a lie repeated often enough. Freedom can be lost, not only through tyrants, but through the widespread indifference of ordinary people. And when that happens, the only thing left to uphold these values is the perseverance of compassionate souls, those who, no matter how small, quietly keep the flame of meaning alive in the darkness. It is no accident that in his final works, Orwell emphasized the need for humble humanity, not grand displays, not lofty ideals, but quiet loyalty to what is right, even when no one sees it, even when no one applauds. In our times, when noise and conflict seem to cover every space, this lesson becomes even more essential. Healing is not about retreating from the world. It is about stepping into it with a clear and compassionate heart. Meaning in life is not found in loud victories, but in quiet moments when we choose goodness, even when no one requires it. Orwell did not allow bitterness to consume his soul, even though he had every reason to despair. Instead, he infused his writing with a fragile but enduring belief that even in the darkest times, compassion remains the most revolutionary and profound act. Don't wait until it's too late. Awakening depends on each individual. In the final lines of 1984, Orwell did not leave a political manifesto, nor did he call for noisy revolutions. Instead, he offered a nearly whispered message: don't let it happen. It depends on you. Not on governments, not on grand movements, but on each individual. On each small decision made every day. Freedom does not disappear overnight. It erodes, little by little, as we accept absurdities, as we remain silent before lies, as we surrender the right to think and feel truthfully. Awakening, therefore, is not some grand act far away. It is a quiet choice. The choice to keep our inner clarity intact. The choice to protect truth even in the smallest situations. Each such choice, though seemingly invisible, becomes a brick in the final wall, defending human dignity. Orwell's message was not a forecast of inevitable doom. It was a warning that the future could still change if we are brave enough not to turn away, if we dare to begin from within ourselves, keeping the inner light alive amid a lost world. When the outside world falls into chaos, where truth is distorted and hearts grow confused, the most important struggle is no longer about changing the times. It lies in keeping a small flame alive within ourselves, the flame of truth, compassion, and silent dignity. Orwell showed us that even when surrounded by lies, even when trust erodes, an individual can still choose to hold on to internal honesty. The deepest healing does not come from the world becoming perfect. It comes from refusing to let external darkness stain the light within. Every kind action, every honest thought, every refusal to accept convenient lies, these are how we keep the world from collapsing entirely. In the thickest darkness, sometimes a single small candle is enough to keep hope alive. The true meaning of freedom, rediscovering reasons to live and love in the world Orwell described. Freedom was not merely a political concept. True freedom is the ability to keep one's mind free from manipulation, to keep one's heart alive amid the coldness of power. The meaning of life does not always arise from great achievements or grand upheavals. Sometimes it is found in daring to love in a world that encourages indifference, in daring to believe in kindness when everything around promotes cynicism, and in choosing to continue hoping, even when hope seems fragile. True freedom is the ability to continue living according to our deepest values, regardless of circumstances. And when we live that way, even in the darkest moments, life can quietly but resiliently shine. Awakening is the silent rebellion of the human soul. The awakening Orwell called for was not noisy revolutions. It was a silent but enduring rebellion within each person, the refusal to let a distorted world deform one's soul. Awakening is the ability to see through the surrounding lies and remain loyal to the truth. It is the ability to hold on to inner silence and listen to the real voice within amid a cacophony of agitation. Each person, in the silence of personal choice, participates in the most profound revolution, the revolution to preserve dignity, compassion, and inner freedom from these solitary awakenings. The future is protected, little by little. We do not need to wait for grand changes every day. We can simply choose to be a little more honest, a little kinder, a little braver, and in doing so, we light a path for ourselves and for the world. George Orwell did not merely leave behind books. He left behind a quiet example of how a single person, within the loneliness and limits of their own life, can still guard truth and compassion through each page. He reminds us that the greatest threat does not come from external tyrants, but from the indifference, forgetfulness, and easy compromises within ourselves. The fight to protect freedom and truth is not just the fight of great movements. It begins with each silent choice to dare to live honestly, to dare to preserve kindness, to dare to keep our inner light burning even when surrounded by darkness. We cannot change the world in a single day, but we can change how we live in it through each thought, each action, each moment of awakening, and through those small but authentic changes, we keep hope alive, not only for ourselves, but for those who come after us. Not Orwell, not anyone else, it is each of us, through our awakening and compassion, who can prevent this world from falling into darkness.